Hey everybody, welcome to Roark Studios. My name is Carol Roark and I am coming to you from the northwest corner of the Mississippi Delta. Fortunately, we are in a very rural area, so we are not quite as locked in as many of you may be right now. I know it's a trying time for so many of us, but what a great time to learn, to discover art, to discover music, to discover time with your family and things, hobbies and books that you can share with your family. I've been a teacher for over 30 years. I'm not getting to meet with my students as like I normally would during the week. So I decided to start this series of videos. And if you will join me each Thursday, I'm going to take you week by week through my process of painting a landscape painting. Now, like I said, I am a plein air painter mostly. That means I go out and paint on location pretty much every day. Just small studies, most part. They're more for information gathering, or as a painter, it would be painter's note taking than actual finished pieces, although sometimes a neat little finished piece comes out of the process. So when I come back in and I paint from my studio, even though I'm using a photograph today, I have been on this location many, many times. This is actually just right across the highway from our farm. And so I have studied this over and over from life. And I encourage you, I know many of you may not be able to go out a lot right now, especially if you're in a city, but you can study out your window. But when the time changes, and it will, this will get better, and you're able to get back outside, take that chance. You don't have to be a great plein air painter. It is just like your sketchbook. It doesn't have to be for anybody but you. But what it will teach you it's just volumes. It will teach you to see things that a camera is never going to show you. Nuances in the shadows, highlights that are not so brassy, colors that the camera just cannot pick up. And then you can take all that back into your studio and incorporate it maybe along with some photographs that you took to help you create a larger piece that you spent more time on in the studio. So that's kind of what I've done here. Now, I do have some plein air studies of this particular piece. They are actually looking another direction. But like I said, I see this field daily. So I'm pretty well associated with it and knowing how to alter the photograph slightly if needed. But this is a fairly simple landscape. One thing I like about the Mississippi Delta, if those of you don't know what the Mississippi Delta is, it is the plain that once was the Mississippi River. Our farm sits right on the bluff, which is on a hill overlooking this flat alluvial plain. And that's what you see here. It's rich farmland, cotton, soybeans, potatoes, rice. We're an agricultural area. The great thing about painting landscapes in the Delta is the landscape is somewhat simplified when you look across these flat plains. So you have sky, you have ground, and you have your vertical tree plains. And so it's to me an easy way to step into landscape painting without being so overwhelmed with a forest or a moving stream or animals, anything of that nature. So our farm looks to the west, sitting on that bluff, looking to the west over a flat surface of fields. You can't imagine the sunsets we see. We get some glorious ones, and we're so fortunate to be here. And that's why I wanted to share this with you. So what we're going to talk about today, I'm not really going to go over all the colors on my palette because I'm just going to concentrate on using burnt sienna. I'm going to show you how I start my paintings with just a tonal wash to set my values. And this, I come from a completely different background of painting. I studied with a master who studied with Henry Hinchy for years. I learned so much about color. I just can't even describe the foundation that he was able to place on me. I do see things a little bit different than some of the colorists. I do see the color, but I tone my colors down just a little bit. And I use more mixes. Very little paint straight out of the tube, although I do use some straight out of the tube. And I will talk about tone and value, which you won't hear a lot from the colorist, because I have a background as an illustrator, and I worked in black and white graphite and ink for years, so I see things in value. And I found that I can solve a lot of problems in my paintings if I start that way. I also like this burnt sienna tone because it works well with most things. Obviously, we have dirt here, but even in the clouds in the sky. Now, I will say, sometimes I change that. Sometimes I will do a wash in yellow ochre if I feel that the scene warrants that. Sometimes I will do it in blue. Sometimes I will do it in multiple shades. Don't ever feel locked into a system or a quote rule. Discover these things on your own. So I want to hopefully give you tools that you can play with and build on and then take into your own work so that you become your own self. So let's get started. Like I said, I have multiple colors on my palette, but I'm not interested in those today. I'm just going to concentrate here, which is on the burnt sienna, and I'm going to thin it down. Now, a word about tools before we go any further. I know art supplies are expensive, no doubt about it, but I cannot stress enough, buy the best materials you can buy. Can't do it right now, that's fine. Get by with what you have, but eventually that's going to hold you back. Get good brushes. This is a brush by Tonal. I love Tonal brushes. They are not insanely expensive at all. I will also use a lot of brushes from Rosemary & Company, as well as Blick Master Stroke bristle brushes. All of these are hog bristle brushes. I like a little bit of strength in my brush, especially as I build and go on into the painting. You will also see me use a palette knife occasionally. And then as far as my paints go, I like to use good quality paint. I'm usually using Gamblin. I also use Michael Harding. And I have a couple of colors that only certain companies make. Grumbacher has one that I really like. Old Holland has one I really like. You'll find what works for you, but try not to use cheap paint, because the colors, for number one, they're not going to be true to what those colors really should be. So if you get through a $10 set of oil paints and you go to start adding new, more expensive, higher grade paints, you're going to have to relearn your color mixes, because the colors you've been using more than likely are not going to be anything like the better brands that you start to add into it. So you don't have to have an extensive palette either. I have another video on that shows you how I get through painting with just 6 colors and white. If you bought 6 great colors of high quality paint, you're probably not going to spend more than if you spent with a whole set of inexpensive paint. So get the best that you can use. The brush I'm going to use today is also a number 10 Tonal hog bristle. It's a flat. Use the biggest brush you're comfortable with. A little teeny tiny brush is not going to do anything but hinder you. So you want to get to where you can use your whole arm. Get a big brush. I have cotton rags handy and Viva paper towels. Now I know paper towels are a little on the hard to find item right now. You don't have to have paper towels. If you do, I recommend Viva because they feel a lot like cloth, but old t-shirts are great too. I have plenty of those laying around. So as I start, I'm using Gamsol, which is a mineral spirit made by Gamblin. I love it because it has very low toxicity and it is completely odorless. And I'm going to thin this burnt sienna down almost to a wash. Sometimes when you see me paint with this, you'll even see it run. Now, I'm establishing my horizon line, which I'll probably mess up in a minute, but anyway, I'm kind of getting an idea. You never want your horizon line running right through the middle, because then that cuts your composition directly in half. Rule of thirds are great, so either have 2/3 sky, 1/3 ground, or vice versa. That gives you a much better composition. I'm going to go with that route here. This painting is actually going to be more about the sky, which is something important you should always ask yourself. What's my painting about? What made me want to paint this? My students hear me all the time say, okay, what's your story? So if you start focusing on something else and it's not your story, then you've taken your viewer to another area. You want your viewer to get the main idea. You want your viewer to be as excited about your painting as you were when you painted it. I love the sky. You want to look for big shapes. That's one reason I like this. I love this shape in this cloud, and the way this shape almost counteracts it in the trees, and then the way the lines pull you in from the old rows from the cotton that was planted there back in the last summer. So I'm going to think about those big masses. Now sometimes, and I'll do it here just to show you, I'll even tone my sky lighter. And I'll just pull this all the way down to my horizon. Then I can take my rag or my paper towel and I can wipe out the lighter areas in my sky. So here that would be the bluer areas. And this is really helpful if I was dealing with buildings that were lit or figures. You'll see me wipe those out sometimes, but I'm going to wipe out my lightest areas. And since this cloud is so wispy up here, I think I'm just going to wipe it out as well. Okay? Now, I'm going to come back in and redefine my darker darks. Notice how I'm holding my brush. I'm not holding it like a pencil as much. That doesn't give me the strokes and the movement that I want. I'm holding it more like this. It's almost like I'm going to shade this cloud mass, just as if I was using the true color. It has a base down here, has a little jut of cloud there. Okay, and then we've got some of these clouds that come in the opposite direction. I see this strong shape here. And I see a strong shape right through here. Not necessarily a shape, but a value. So there's somewhat of kind of where I want my sky to go. Doesn't have to be. I'm not totally locked into this. I can alter it as I go, but it just gives me a plan of action. Okay, back to my horizon. So I've got this small area of trees in the far distance. And you know, I think I'm going to raise those up a little bit. So I can do one of two things. And this is why I like, instead of drawing with a pencil, I prefer to this. I can either just wipe it in or I can just take it out. A lot easier to do that than it is to try to erase pencil on canvas. I drew with pencil and charcoal on canvas for years, and this is so much easier. Okay, I don't want this group of trees stopping dead center as well. So I'm going to shift them, and I'm going to make sure that mass stays a little further to the left. It drops down a little. It's a little lower than that mass in the background. And notice how I'm painting this. These trees are vertical, so I'm going to keep my strokes vertical. Okay, if you want some of that direction from the field, you can pull some of these. That's going to give us some perspective as well. You don't have to do this. This is up to you. Your drawing is your map. So you add what you need to get you where you're going. See a little bit darker area through here. So I'm going to darken that a bit. Get some of the wispiness to these clouds. Build up the value here just a little bit more. And there's my start. Now, sometimes if I'm going to let this dry before I move forward, and it's going to dry fairly fast because we thinned that Gamsol down so much. If I am working in a sky that maybe doesn't have a lot of dynamic shapes in the clouds, I may not wash the sky, especially if it's really, really blue sky. I may leave it, lay in the values on my ground, and then immediately start my sky. This sky, because we have these strong shapes, lend itself to going on and doing the value study throughout the whole painting. So this is going to dry. And so next week, I hope you'll join me on Thursday, and we'll take it to the next step, which will be into our sky area here. So once again, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button as well. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. And if you want to see more of my work, be sure to go to my website, www.carolroark.com, or you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram, which is Roark Studios on Facebook and Instagram. And once again, it's Roark, R-O-A-R-K. So I hope you attempt this. I hope we get to paint it together, and hope I can teach you something. Hope you have a great rest of the day. Stay safe, everyone.